Thank you for inviting me today. Yeah, I want to speak only for like 30 minutes. It's gonna be weird. This is gonna be a weird format that I haven't tried before yet. That I'm actually just gonna try to focus on just one project, and this is and one idea and one argument. It has many details and subtleties, but uh, bear with me. You, as I try this new format. In particular, I'm going to be talking about the project on silencing slavery, which I think you guys saw a little bit before coming today. And I want to talk about it as an example of an intervention in historical methods, especially in the way that this is a solidly digital humanities project. It's like it's very hard to do something like this on a book. Now, I could make all the arguments that we make in the project in a book by narrativizing them, turning them into argumentative prose. But the project still would have to be what it is in order to make its arguments. And instead of writing a book about it, I was also talking to Brian about this, how I don't like to when I sit down to write, I don't like to write about the age. I prefer simply to talk to you today. And I hope that you maybe give me some pushback or, pursue some of the strands that I will open up for you with me and with each other in the question and answer conversation section. So on silencing slavery, I'm going to share my screen here. Sorry, I have time report open. On silencing slavery was started towards the end of the first year of the pandemic. I was wrapping up a couple of other projects, and we started this one. It took us about 2 years project, which I hadn't done one that took that long in a while. I had already the past 3 or 4 years, we were doing very rapid projects, including the Torn Apart project that Brian mentioned. And actually, we started a little bit of a strand of practice and theory in digital humanities around this capacity that we have to do things very fast using, collaborative research methods and our abilities to communicate with each other in real time using Twitter, Telegram, whatever. But anyway, so when we started doing this project, we actually wanted to take our time with this one because of the questions that this opened up for us. So this comes out of the work of Celia Naylor, who's a historian of the Caribbean during especially in the 18th and 19th century. And she looks at questions of slavery, race, the formation of agencies in Black communities, et cetera, et cetera. And she has a book called On Silencing Slavery. Now, the book has a different subtitle because the book was being produced as we were doing this. So there are 2 projects with the title On Silencing Slavery. Her book, which I cannot lay claim to any of it, is out already. And it's very well worth a read. It is a phenomenal book. And then we have this companion project. I hesitate to call it a sort of like an appendix because it's not. It's a separate project, and you will see. And actually, in the book, Celia talks a lot about how this is a parallel work, one that is not simply just like, the final chapter of the book. And that will become evident soon. So both the book and this web project are based on what happened in a plantation in Jamaica called the Rose Hall Plantation. And I got to tell you a little bit of that plantation, a little bit of the background, so you can understand a little bit more what's going on in the project. right now, today, that plantation is the #1 tourist destination. Now, everybody in the audience that I know, I'm sure, has seen this phenomenon of the plantation destinations, people having weddings at these things. And in the United States, we have many, with Jamestown, etc., with these recreations of these spaces, colonial spaces, that are a little bit whitewashed or a lot whitewashed. And this one in particular is whitewash around the story of the White Witch of Rose Hall. The tour guides will tell you the legend of this woman who was kind to slaves, and she was in love with one of them, an Ungan, a priest. And for her sin, she was murdered by the husband, and her spirit roams the plantation. Now, from a historical point of view, this is bonkers. This woman did not exist. And also, it's very, for some folks who are informed about these kinds of things, a clear attempt at drawing attention away from the real horrors of the plantation, kind of making the tourists feel a little edgy, a little scared, without them having to face the real horror of thinking about what actually did happen in this plantation. It was a plantation. People were forced to work, raped, lived in conditions that led to a ridiculously high infant mortality. And like any other site of chattel slavery in the Americas, the people who really experienced horror and the people who can, we may say, haunt these spaces are the slaves, or the enslaved, if you prefer to say it that way. The challenge for us, well, the book goes into all historical details, building up a sort of historical argument around the concept of microhistories. And they do play a role in this project, as you will see soon, and methodological approaches to trying to understand the plantation life in a place that leaves very few records. And as this project, it also centers the lives of these folks, of the Black community that lived and toiled and suffered here. And I'm sure also found joy in life. Now, the question that we wanted to ask in this project, not the book, is slightly different, which is the question of the humanity of data, the dignity of data. Both the book and the project depend on these series of documents that are listed on the documents page. Now, I don't know if there's any historians. I know Ninel is a historian, so she might have seen similar documents to this. But those of you who have a historical background may have seen these kinds of documents. There's slave registers. And some people argue that the birth of modern accounting practices come from these ledgers. They're written in a very nice schoolboy's calligraphy, and these columns and rows are built, with the care of a schoolboy with a new ruler. You can almost imagine the white assistant who is in charge of writing these things down, sitting at his desk by candlelight, doing these things. But behind this sort of clean little organization and information is an enormous amount of horror and dehumanization. Because what we're basically seeing here is the reduction of people in the archive to what Saidiya Hartman calls their death, whether it's social death or real. These folks are being reduced to these markers: age, whether they're being classified as African or Creole, and their color. A few remarks tell us that they had kids. But all in all, this is a reduction of the human to data, in which we see a double dehumanization, because these people are already been subjected to dehumanization in slavery, right? They're already suffering. They're being treated as less than human, codified in the law and many legal regimes in the Atlantic world as less than human, and being treated as such, being treated as commodities. But in being converted into this data, they suffer yet another layer of dehumanization. Now, people who study the history of data will be the first to tell you that data has this effect, especially when it's data about human subjects, where we are reduced. Now, of course, I'm Generation X, so I grew up in the 80s. We had a Sting with that song that he has, like, you can collect all the data about me, but you still don't know nothing about me, from when he broke up with the police. I don't know if that rings a bell to you. But also it's been part of our culture growing up that, you got my social security, but you don't know me. We have this even mainstream cultural reaction to being reduced to numbers and being understood. Everybody doesn't want to just be reduced to small data points. And of course, in recent years, all of our lives have been datafied by the many apps that we use, not only the social media apps. There's a lot of stuff on our phone that captures data about us and sells it, and this data has become gold. We are living through very strange times in which one of the most valuable things of the planet is an algorithmically driven, generated psychological profile of each of us, so that advertisers can figure out what to sell us. But people of color, minoritized communities, racialized communities, gendered communities, sexualized communities, folks, just communities, we don't have to be in a community with each other to be these things, are also constantly bombarded by a representation of their lived experiences that takes the form of datafication. But datafication is not just the numbers that get crunched and get turned into ledgers, rows, and columns these days, although most data in the planet can be expressed as such, as a table of rows and columns. We also live in times in which data is visualized, and visualization, the representation of data, whether human or something else, in graphical means has become so mainstream that every day on the New York Times, on the cover, I see a visualization. Everywhere we look, we see visualizations, and there's a data literacy or a visualization literacy in 2023 that perhaps wasn't there like 10 years ago. I remember also in Digital Humanities talking about, like, yeah, we can do all these visualizations, but people won't even know how to read them because data literacy is so low, etc. But by now, it's become so common that I think the levels are higher for how we read these things. But the genres continue to be kind of stale and set in stone. Not much has changed. So the main question here that we asked in this project is, can we rehumanize the data? And can we actually create original visuals, interactive, because these data visualizations tend to be interactive when they're presented online, in a way that brings back dignity, honor, respect to the lives of these folks who lived and suffered there. Can our modern genres, the dominant modes, there's no the dominant mode. One of the dominant modes of modern life today, data and visualization, two of these modes, can these things be rescued from this kind of tendency they have to dehumanize? That's what we set out to do. And that's why we said we're going to take our time because we're going to do this so slow. And we're going to meet like, every week religiously to debate and talk and build, produce this thing. And every part of the process, we're going to be asking that question. Is this taking dignity away? Or is this, is this bringing a little bit of humanity back? And I'll share the project again. The result of that exercise, it took us 2 years. The result of that exercise is this. This is we call it the flower of Rose Hall. This visualization, we hope, right away evokes sort of botany, organic life. We get the leaves, they're randomized, so on your screen they look different than on mine, the background. And each of these curves, petals, as we call them, represents a person. Somebody who lived and toiled and had family in Rose Hall. Right here, when you click on one, right here opens up on the right-hand side a micro history of that person. So this is one of the first take home as we were doing this. So one of the little details that we were like, yes, we want to do that. There are many more. I'll try to touch on some of the greatest hits, but we could have done automatic based on the data that we had from these left registers. We could have done a sort of bot that would have generated these stories. And we would have been done with that work in 1 week. Coding a little bit of code, looks at the data, generates the stories like any other text bot you've ever seen on Twitter. We didn't want to do that. We didn't want to do that because we already saw a rush of people who were trying to use that approach, even using AI, to reconstruct the lives of slaves using algorithmic methods rather than the human method of trying to engage with each person and reconstruct that by using many other sources and using everything that we know as historians. I'm not a historian, but I've hung out with enough of them that by now I'm kind of maybe honorary. There's tons of examples of this. For example, there's this archive called Freedom on the Move that has been actually building a really large database of fugitives in the United States. I think they're based in South Carolina. I don't remember. So there's this rich company. There's this black guy who owns, he's a millionaire, he's in finance. And he has a huge team of programmers and developers, as most millionaires do these days. And he heard about digital humanities, got super interested in it, and he told his team of people who've been coding all their lives to count money, can you please do a bot that looks at this database and using artificial intelligence tries to reconstruct the lives of these people? They also did a little bit of a mashup, so they draw from other sources like Ancestry.com and stuff like that, but everything is driven algorithmic. Sadly, because Elon Musk took that as in a fight against bots, we don't see the tweets anymore. But this account was tweeting and tweeting and tweeting reconstructed lives of people. Now, some of you may have been around 5 or 6 years ago when Tupac Shakur was reconstructed as a hologram. It's another example of how in our time we want to reconstruct the dead using algorithmic approaches. Right now, for example, there's a humongous effort being driven by Matrix, who is an old school digital humanities operation that partnered with slavevoyages.org, which you may have seen already, which is the largest store of data for the Black Atlantic slave trade in the United States. And I'll return to slave voyages in a second, but they also trying to convince everybody in the United States who works on this subject to send them data sets And they're trying to push everybody to work with linked open data because their dream, and I've heard them present on this, is to have a search box where you can reconstruct the lives of people based on algorithmic approaches to the different archives, connecting them, doing matchups, and probably now with generative AI, making the same mistake that this millionaire made. So that's the context in which we said, no, we're not going to do this as an algorithm. In fact, we're gonna Celia and a postdoc went to town for 1 year. I can't remember anything right now. Sorry. Oh man, my memory slips. She's there in the about page and then in the reflections. And the reason I don't remember is because I actually never met her. I was working with what's here on the digital side of this. They went to town doing the microhistories for every single one of these things. All right. So now we have, every time we click on this, a story that was written by a researcher using narrative and prose, both descendants of Black folk. So that's one. Two, something else that it's been floating around in our world for a while is this idea of disaggregating data. Aggregating data creates this effect that sometimes doesn't allow us to see things at the resolution that we need to see them for X or for Y. In the health industry, for example, this is Alondra Nelson, did a really great work working for the Biden administration, kind of pushing this concept through the Office of Science and Innovation at the White House. In healthcare, for example, sometimes lumping all women under the same category doesn't makes invisible the differences between Black women and white women, for example, in this country, and the level of healthcare that they care. So sometimes, in order to really understand problems, we need to disaggregate data, move away from this aggregation. Now, this particular flower is a response to the pie chart that everybody knows. Everybody's seen pie charts. Here, let me show you an example of a pie chart that aggregates human subjects here. This one is from Victims of Modern Slavery, from the website Estatista. So these kind of really big macroscopic views tend to lump things: male, female, child, adult, right? And I know most of you are human. Everybody, I assume, or most people here in this chat are humanists. So you're like, obviously, like right away, I see problems with this. Like I am, so much is being erased by doing the segregation. So in our project, sorry, let me go back to Slave Voyages. Slave Voyages has a series of maps that have become popular. Many of them actually circulate on social media regularly, especially these two bottom ones, and this one. And they, of course, are lumping everything, right? They have their uses, but they also lie too much. So one of the things we wanted to do is disaggregate everything to the person. So I think if we're going to use data in a way that rehumanizes, we have to go away from this pie chart mentality, tropes, and create a form of visualization that allows us to keep that. Now, we have gender, for example. Here it is, gender. This is the flower organized by gender. We have age. Age is the one where you can see this kind of pie chartiness, the pie chartality of it. The little petals are babies that died, babies and little kids that died. The inner circle represents the earliest year that we start having data from, and 1832. So the place where the petal starts is the year where they were born. So here you would see the people that were born towards the end. Some of them didn't make it, but also you see some of them who lived beyond So they were kids when they left the plantation. 1832 is the end of the plantation. The slaves are free. So the pie chartiness is there, but we are not making the mistake of aggregating them. We are disaggregating them, and we still give ourselves the possibility of starting to see patterns according to markers. Matrilineage is my favorite one because it centers the woman. And actually, by visualizing matrilineage here, and actually the left column is different in the matrilineage because right here in colors we see the mothers, and then you start seeing the kids that they had. By doing this visualization, we hadn't seen this visualization, we're also doing another important work of rehumanizing here, which is, or at least we're making the claim that these were matriarchal societies. The communities and bonds that were formed around the matrilineage. We're making that argument. It's giving back a little bit of the life that they had here in visual forms. Again, like I said at the beginning, we're trying to push the boundaries of what the digital can do. This is not a book. This is not prose. This is an exercise in seeing what are the limits, what are the possibilities of the digital. Now, so I gave you 3 ways in which we are we were pushing towards that rehumanization, trying to push the limits of what this medium can do. I'll stop there. There's so many other little things that we did, as many of them behind the scenes that you won't even notice. But moving towards the conclusion of my exposition of this argument that we're making visually, let me tell you now. Let me separate that from the argument I'm making to you about this. We think these visuals are making an argument, and the way we build this is making an argument. But let me tell you, my argument, or lack of an argument to you, is that I'm not satisfied. I actually came out of this project after 2 years, learning so much about all the ways and pitfalls in which we can dehumanize by doing this. And I can see some of the ways in which we can do a little bit to, pay our respects, lay flowers by the graves of these folks who are the ancestors of our friends, people we care about. But I also I'm not 100% convinced. I think there's still a lot more work to be done, so I'm not going to sit here and argue that we succeeded. Please take what I just exposed as our honest attempt to break down this argument and to bring down these possibilities to as many things that we could and push the conversation. So instead of an argument, it's more of like an encouragement to others in our community in digital humanities to not accept tools from off the shelf, to not accept genres and modes of representation from off the shelves, ways of organizing data from off the shelf, and just say like, well, this is this is the international standard of doing this thing, or this is how my DH lab told me I needed to do these things. But to come and participate in the world in which we're trying to create artisanal solutions to really difficult problems in order to understand whether this is going to be what are the possibilities that this can be a force for good in the world or not. We have so much work to do in trying to figure out that these things that we take for granted in the newspaper every morning and all around us, that they speak transparently, and they don't. So that's it. Take it as an invitation. Now, of course, this is why I'm shutting up right now, because I want to talk to you about like, oh man, I can see this, or maybe this other thing. Or I'm thinking of doing this project, and I think this is one of the challenges. I want to have that conversation with you. And we only have like 20 minutes, but let's do it. And I can stay after 6. I don't mind. So I'll shut up there so we can talk.
Thanks so much, Alex. Yeah, we have about 20 minutes for conversation, so feel free to just unmute and talk or type something into the chat. I'll just start by saying that I first saw this project, I don't know, a few months ago or a year ago or whatever. When I first saw it, and when I first go to that main screen, that homepage, it didn't seem like humanizing to me. I just saw I didn't know what I was looking at really. It was a fancy kind of chart. And it took a lot of poking around the website to really understand what it was doing. And after a while I started to see all the things that you showed. But to me there was a lot of work to try to understand what was being shown. It wasn't like clear immediately, and I don't know if that was like also part of the design, or if that kind of experience leads to some other insights. Like the user has to kind of figure out what's going on to some extent.
Yeah, that came up in conversation. We debated whether we were going to have that's like 3 paragraph. But it took me 30 minutes to show you just 3 things, like that we were trying to do. We even wrote some things to like they're in the about page now, or a version of the in the about page. Well, you know how some of my projects, for example, start with that. Like Same Boat starts with the 3 paragraphs. Wax starts with 2 paragraphs. I in fact, that's my favorite mode of starting. Just like 2 paragraphs. You don't see anything yet, and then when you click on things, you kind of guide it towards this. I think we landed, if my memory serves correctly, I think we landed on the strangeness of the flower to welcome. We did have a little modal in the, if you reload the page, you'll see a little pop-up screen that says, this is to honor the people who live there. And then we said, no, we'll start with the strangeness of it and allow people to start engaging with the lives of these people, rather than having an instant experience of like, oh yeah, now I see I see all the lives of these people. Now we also knew, I don't remember discussing this, but we also knew, actually we built this project. Every time we've had one of these meetings to debate, and as we were building, we filmed it, and it's on YouTube, and nobody has watched it, and I don't recommend it because it's 2 years worth of YouTube videos of people talking about pixels and trigonometry and its relationship to the dignity of ancestors. And not recommended, is insane. But the thing is that this project is as much about the process of spending 2 years with a very small data set, tiny, to ask questions about larger societal trends in data and in graphics. And in a sense, it's funny because the product itself doesn't, unless you experience it and sit with it, unless you sit with it a lot less than 2 years, unless you sit with it for like 30 minutes or an hour, still better than sitting with the book, which takes you like 6 hours, right? You won't start seeing these things, that we cannot communicate process. And like I told you at the beginning also, I don't want to write a book or even an essay about digital humanities projects. I prefer to talk to you. But now one of the things, so one of the outcomes is that we can actually teach. When I teach now, hold on a second. Pickles, no, stop. Pickles, stop. Sorry, Mr. Pickles. One of the outcomes is, of course, the people who are involved in this project, we talk about it at conferences. We have a time to explain ourselves. And I also use what I've learned during this project in my teaching, in my classroom. When I teach students, how to think about artisanal projects that are critical, that are trying to push the boundaries of what can be done. It's very useful to have lived through that.
It reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if this project is still up. It used to be a project I showed all the time. I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, Invisible Australians, which
Yeah,
was kind of trying
beautiful.
to humanize uh, data about uh, Australian citizens with Asian heritage.
That were immigrants from Asia at the beginning
Yeah,
of the 20th
yeah,
century.
and but they had
Yeah,
photographs to work with, and when you go to their homepage, you just it's just this kind of cascade of faces uh, with a something on the top saying the real face of white Australia, and it was a kind
yeah.
of
That was
different.
done by Ragge. If you look at Wragge is the name of the digital humanist. I'm blanking on his first name right now, but he's really cool. And the thing is that he started from one of the largest databases of digital collections built in the early 20th century, 21st century, called Trove
Mhm.
in Australia. Uh, but it was presented in this dry digital, like library standard,
Mhm.
like browse, search, and like your typical library digital collection of
You had to
everything.
enter data by you had to search by like document number. Um,
It was just
and
horrible.
this way you could browse through faces and enter the
Yeah.
archives that way. So
So
it's
he
like,
transformed the existing data into a place that made you feel like you were part of these people's stories. And it was a beautiful project. Yeah, I remember being a graduate student when I saw it too, for the first time. And I eventually met him, Raga. He's a great guy. And very creative too. Very creative. And I know some of you are thinking about doing this. If you're here, you're thinking about doing digital humanities project. And look, I don't want to be an evangelist here. Many of you are going to end up doing something very like standard, you like a little make a site with 200 manuscripts that you care about or 200 photographs that you care about, and they're going to be organized a particular way. And that's going to be your first experience in the age. And I'm here to help you, teach you anything you need to do those kinds of projects. But there will be a few of you who will want to maybe focus on digital humanities and learn and get deeper into the histories and the debates and the conversations, and then you might at one point you might want to do something artisanal, something completely that nobody has done because you have questions about like the adequacy of some of these things.
like Rebecca, we got a couple raised
Yeah.
hands. Rebecca, and then
Amy, yeah, I think Amy and then Rebecca. Amy, I think raised first.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Alex. Thanks for spending time with us. So I'm pretty new to DH projects. I'm an associate professor in the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies department. And one of the main goals or sort of questions that I'm grappling with is how do I go about embedding anti-racist and feminist principles into the project from the get-go in the conceptual but also the technical aspects of it. And I'm imagining in those 2 years of weekly meetings that you held, there were a lot of questions and thought given to that. So I'm wondering if you could speak to us about some of the answers or ideas that you and your team came to.
Yeah, basically we wanted this to be a project that fights against the racism inherent in the way that this plantation is being run right now. The owners of the company are Republican family in Maine, I think, who own several of these plantation destinations in the United States and in the Caribbean. And we wanted to center the lives of these folks there to fight against these racists, right? In one part, to celebrate the lives of these folks. Well, celebrating the lives of these folks is fighting against the racists. It's one and the same thing. And obviously, you saw we landed on the matrilinear visualization, one of the things that we're the proudest of, because we're also discussing issues of gender. And the the thing is that yes, we had enormous conversations. So let me tell you about how this more or less transpired. So every time we were about to do the next step, whatever that next step was, we had a conversation. We were like, how do we how does this does doing flowers instead of wedges, does that help us move to towards rehumanization or dehumanization? We landed on the answer that the curves, the petal shape, is more organic and more beautiful than the wedges. The wedges are hard, violent, cold. We use them to stab vampires in the heart. And the most graphics out there in the world are wedges. Well, most circular type graphical representations are wedges. So this was us, answering that question for that next step. And then the next step, how are we going to handle, the transcription of this data from these documents to a spreadsheet? And then how do we do that? Well, we landed on using comma separated values because they're minimal computing, waste less energy, and we know that global warming is affecting people of color more than anything else. So it's like really complex and subtle conversations based on our experience as professionals in digital humanity that come at every turn, and at every turn you try to answer. How is this, or how's that? How is this gonna? And obviously you don't want to. There are two types of things you want to probably avoid, and this is my recommendation to you as a person who has helped people throughout his life. Brian knows, for the past 10 years, I've done projects that help people on the ground, not just talk about like anti-racism, like Kendi or something like Ibram Kendi, got caught for all his bullshit over there at Boston University recently. If you really want to help, you want to avoid these two things. One is the politics of refusal. The politics of refusal is best represented by the late David Columbia, who was hated my guts. He wrote some interesting critical books where he criticized technology, and Bitcoin deserved the trashing that he deserved, but he was against digital humanities because he hated all technology. A politics of refusal says we have to refuse technology. Now we cannot engage. So his answer to the problem where their data visualization and the transformation of data can help us be not only better historians, but actually do history in a way that respects and honors the lives of the people whose histories we are telling, and whose history we're describing. In order for us to do that, we have to keep going. It cannot be a politics of refusal and say, I'm just not going to do this. Because somebody else will. That millionaire guy will do it, right? So that's the one thing that you definitely have to avoid, that the politics of refusal. Every iPhone is built with cobalt, and there are children working mines in the Central Republic of Congo, and it's a war-torn a place because of this resource extraction. And what are you going to do? Give up your iPhone? Don't do that. Use your iPhone to help people. The other one that you want to that I recommend to everybody here, colleagues and young folks and students, is don't let your hesitations and doubts stop you once you're doing the project, or keep on delaying it. Give yourself a reasonable timeline that is where you're going to say, it's going to take us 2 years because we want to do this slow, and we want to do the process, and we want to go through the process. But there are many times and turns where you're like, okay, we're going to stop. Don't stop from the process. You might want to stop from publication later. So some things are better not published, or some things are not better done, but don't stop yourself, especially if you're starting. Don't stop yourself, because one thing you're learning is how to be better for the next round, for the next project. Now, I know it's weird because I say that's the thing. There are people in digital humanities that have built one project, and their whole lives, that's been like slavevoyages.org, that team has only worked on that one project. Many of them are around in digital humanities, but they're one project people. Now, I'm speaking as somebody who's like a 25 project person. Probably, I don't know, I haven't counted. It's a lot. So I'm always looking forward to what I'm learning now, so that in the next round I do better, right? So don't stop yourselves. Don't refuse it from the get-go, and once you're in, don't stop because of doubts you have. Learn, get through it. I mean, that would be my generic advice, because for how to deal with anti-racism, how do you build anti-racism and feminism into everything you do, with this, every step of the way you ask it, but every step of the way, sometimes you're going to get answers you don't like. And I'm trying to get you not to let that discourage you. I hope that helps. Rebecca.
Hi, yeah, Alex, thank you so much for talking with us and showing us this project. You touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask about your process, the design process that the flower and kind of botanical imagery came out of, because it seems like that's such a huge challenge with digital media, especially for commemoration, that we're having to kind of work against the coldness of technology to create a mode of commemoration that feels organic, like you said. And so you mentioned how you were, unsatisfied with some aspects of the project. I'm curious what other potential visualizations you were working with, or kind of how you approached from like both a design and kind of a technical. And I know we only have like 2 minutes left, so just anything you want to say sort of on that.
Yeah, I can stay. Yeah, I can stay. I can stay at past 6. If anybody has to go, obviously. So it's not only the technology that's called, it's also visuality. The graphics don't need to be on a screen necessarily. They don't need to be interactive, right? We could print the different forms of the rose on paper and color, high gloss, and like if we would have done wedges, they would still be cold, right? So we're constantly thinking in terms of the graphic design itself. We'll talk about technology design in a second. In terms of graphic design itself, we're tapping into the tradition of art history, the tradition of scientific graphical forms, social scientific graphical representation, the history of visualization, and also the history of design itself. We're not experts by any means, but we're not also we also relatively educated in these things. So we discuss these things. So we have to have conversations about the connotations of a wedge versus a petal. You have to tap into how it came about that we ended up with wedges in the first place. Now, for the technological side, design, these conversations about design are very jargony, because they take place. We're talking about objects, what classes. Whereas we're using Ember for this one. This one was built with Ember, so we're talking about how to pass data with this method or pass it with this other method, and about how the whole thing is architected. And it is. You're welcome to watch these YouTube videos, and you'll see exactly what I mean. There's no way for me to recreate this for you in the Zoom call, because I don't want to assume programming knowledge for the people on the call, so I would be alienating most of you. And I don't want to do that. But basically, those conversations happen where you try to use the language of code, because that is the language that allows you to build these things. You're discussing like this. You have to code it. So me and Wazir are coding this, and about what different techniques in coding. How they relate to what we want to accomplish in the larger goal, right? So again, this is one of those things where to emphasize this, like these things take on a level of detail that is very almost absurd, and it's always around this question of what is the step that we're doing right now, and how does this step relate to all these other things? And depending on whether talking about a graphical problem or a technological problem that we're trying to solve, we're going to have discussions about that. And these discussions were very organic. They themselves are like micro histories of our own lived experiences. Everything that we have learned so far comes into this conversation. So Moisir is a brilliant digital humanist. Now, let me show you another example to contrast to this one about how me and Moisir think about these things together. I worked with him on one other project similar to this one, which was mentioned already, the Torn Apart Separados project. And I was going to show you one visualization there. Where's my... So in Torn Apart Separados, there's the wedges visualization. The main one, the iconic one is the one, all these orange dots represent places where the United States keeps immigrants imprisoned. When the ICE captures them, these are places where ICE has deals with local prisons, some prisons they own and stuff like that, jails and stuff like that. And this is a map of the carceral infrastructure, right? That's the iconic one. But the one I want to show you is wedges. And I think wedges is in, no. This is every one of these ones is a good one. This one is not a bad one. This one is where they kept the children separated in their zero tolerance policy. Part of our design thing was we didn't want people to know about them. We didn't want people to know exactly where the jails were located, because even from the left, people were going to protest there, and we thought that was putting the kids at risk of more state violence, that they were already suffering state violence. But if there was a clash between protesters and things like this, we have kids there. So we didn't want to show them where they were in the visualization exactly. But also the Trump administration was moving them around so that lawyers couldn't help them. So in this visualization, we kind of give you a general sense of where they are, but every time you try to click on one, they move, kind of replicating what the lawyers are experiencing and community workers are experiencing. But let me go to volume 2 to find the wedges. Volume 2 is where we mapped out the finances. These are by parties, but in the visualizations, we have lines. Here it is. So here's the cold wedges. So this one is a representation of people who get deported by exit point. It's usually airports. So for example, New Orleans International Airport, 2017, we have data from 2014, I think, until 2017. About 4,000 people were removed from the United States. Their families were torn apart by these policies. And each one of these wedges represent a place where that tear is happening. The overall effect of the graphic is that America is being riven by these stakes, right? Rhymes with the theme of the overall project, which is that we want to emphasize that what is happening here is that we're breaking apart families. But also in this visualization, we see America being torn apart, pricked by needles everywhere, the pain and the suffering of all of these people. So this is one in which the wedges played. We wanted wedges. Like we don't want pedals. We want wedges. It is still communicating scientific data, right? And scientific data. There's knowledge here. There's knowledge in the pedals too, but it's pushing the boundaries between art and knowledge, or it's maybe introducing new epistemologies or boundary epistemologies of how do we understand these things. Epistemologies that are made possible by these digital techniques that people like me are dedicating their lives to. So. Does that answer your question about design? I hope so. It's such a hard question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I wish I could give you like a recipe. Like the recipe is to sit down and go through the process. That's the only recipe. And little by little, you learn and you learn and you learn, and then the process gets more complicated. You end up asking more annoying questions of yourself.
Thank you, Alex. We're a few minutes over time, but always good to hear you. Always enlightening and provocative. So thanks so much.
I hope so.